That's the one thing that seems to always stay true,
Mm.
unless you're Bob Dylan. All right. Okay, coding deep dive for June 26, 2023. Let's see what we got. We had put some stuff in the queue for this week.
Okay.
I remember items 2 and 3. I don't remember the pull requests. Let's take a look. Might have just been kind of tied to number 2. Let's see. Let's just see what that is so we know what it is on the agenda and we don't add it again by mistake. And then just if you think of any other agenda items, we'll add those as well.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, okay. This is what it was. All right. This was whether we should store stuff in metadata in a code block in both places from the Weaver.
The metadata conversation.
Yes. Which,
Okay.
If we don't have anything else on the agenda, we could. I think we feel like kind of we discussed it a little bit offline, but maybe it's still good to.
Yeah, I feel like the only reason I had added that is because I think we had landed at something that I think we thought was fine for now to like actually close it and finish it and not think about it, but it was like a big enough back and forth that I thought it might be useful to actually go back or actually like talk about it in person to make sure that we're all on the same page about it. But
it was a list of courts, right? That was the specific thing. Yeah.
Yes.
There's also the multi-select that's lower down.
There's something left over from last week. Oh yeah, that's worth discussing too.
Yeah.
I guess I can leave it there and just copy it actually. Yeah, that's good. Anything else that anyone wants to add to the list? They're all very vague. This one might be the most concrete so far, actually. Maybe, and then maybe followed by this one. So we should probably start with concrete and move down to vague.
Okay.
Or open-ended.
Okay.
Anything else that anyone wanted to talk about?
I mean, I have stuff, but like,
You want to just add it so you remember next time?
But I mean, it might be gone by next time. It's just
Okay.
technical challenges right now with S3 and
I think that's fine.
stuff like that.
Stuff that you would like some help with, or
Yeah, if possible. But I mean, it might be gone next week, and this week I might have to go in a minute. So
okay. Well, if you want to add it, you can just type it in whenever you have a chance. I feel like that's fine for us just to have it on the list. So this is one that I was thinking about. So we have these interviews lining up for translation. I was thinking one way we could make translation a lot easier for authors is to always load the translation files all of the time. And that does not mean they'd actually show any translated strings. They just kind of be there available. The way DocAssemble works, like you just add a translation block and you say, here's where the translated strings are. And I was thinking, okay, what are some ways to decide if that's a good idea or not? I kind of understand the developer experience and the different experiences there that would lean towards that. Feels like there's some slight ease of use benefits there. Not overwhelming. And the thing, what I don't really, and I can imagine some ways that it could slow down the interview. I've not had performance problems with interviews that use translation. but we'd be adding this overhead to every interview. I don't know how to measure the overhead to figure out if that's meaningful or not. And the other way we could look at it is to actually inspect the code and see what we think it should do. It might not even be invoked unless you explicitly say I'm using language X versus language Y.
Yeah, would these be like, supposing they edited the code and didn't edit the translations? Would the translations affect things if you like Spanish users went to the Spanish page and like the code in the translations hadn't been updated? So you've got this translation file for Spanish. Is it like automatically?
It's keyed to an
Active?
exact literal translation. So, and it's actually, I think it's
Yeah,
some kind of
yeah.
digest. So if the text changes in English, it invalidates the translation. So you never have to worry about an old translation lingering around once the under source text has changed.
Would that be
Is that what your question
confusing to
was?
the author? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Would that be confusing to the author if they had these files and they looked at them and they're like, these aren't relevant to, like, why don't these match up with what I've done? Or do you think by the time people translate, they already know what they're doing with translations?
I mean, so we're only going to be translating system phrases basically, right? So if those, I think part of our maintenance would be to keep the translations periodically up to date. I'm not sure how often we should try to update the translations. But what happens right now is that when people send out stuff for translations, they end up translating the same text over and over again. And it's a lot of text that's not even used in their interview because the translation file is every YAML file that your interview references. And most people use like 40% of the strings in assembly line. So what I want to get,
do we actually have numbers on that, or maybe
I'm just giving
estimating?
ballpark.
Okay,
I'm just saying,
I
like,
was
if you look at the
excited.
interviews,
Sorry,
you're like,
that's fine.
no,
That's
I don't
fine.
have real numbers on it.
Okay.
But we've translated some text into
Yeah.
Spanish, like the same exact text 3 or 4 times probably, and someone's had to pay to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to avoid that by making it really, really easy to already have those base phrases in a file ready to go. So when they generate the translation file, it will already be shown as translated.
Are the translations modular? So could ALKiln provide translations itself? I'm just thinking of like the whole situation, just trying to think about the whole situation.
Could ALKiln provide translations?
Not ALKiln, my brain. Assembly line, provide translations for its stuff.
That's what we're talking about,
That's
right?
what
Like
this-
that's the only thing we can do.
Not generating per interview. I mean, like containing in the assembly line interview its own translations.
Also, yes, yeah, that's how it would work, right?
That's exactly how it would work. If
So
it's
it
helpful,
wouldn't
I
be
could
in the
pull up a
Weaver.
translation file. Would that be helpful?
No, I know what a translation file looks like. So
It might be helpful to me because I don't actually.
Okay.
Okay.
I was gonna say at some point I was trying to figure out as much as I could, but like I don't know a ton about just how DocSimple handles it, and I have the language support tab open, and I'm trying to go back and forth on this in the conversation.
Okay.
Sure.
And you're looking at the documentation, not the source code, right, Bryce?
Yeah,
Maybe we could use a little time to look at the source code at some point, and maybe we'll figure out if we think it should have a performance impact or not. And then if so, is it worth measuring how big of an impact it is?
Mhm.
Oh, just load. I thought we were talking about generating in the Weaver. Okay, never mind. Never mind my protests.
Well, I don't believe in machine translation right now for production use. So yeah, we would never pre-translate anything for anybody.
Agreed.
Yeah, that was part of my.
Okay.
We're
I
just
thought
saying the
I thought they
system
were gonna be
phrases that have been
hard-coded.
translated like again and again and again, we'll have those loaded. That's what we're saying.
Sure.
So that when, yeah, okay, so big picture overflow. I'm going to pull up a translation file in a second. I guess I could go to.
I think I understand that part now. That makes a lot more sense to me.
You go to generate a translation file.
Mhm.
DocAssemble loads all of the YAML files and gets all of the strings that would be shown to the user. Anything that, like, basically where you can put a Mako expression, it puts
Yeah.
into this Excel spreadsheet.
I gotta find that code.
And then actually, I'm wondering, there's one thing that I just was thinking about. So the order that you include these files is important. I think it's also.
I mean, it
to
is in general,
override it.
but okay, maybe, sorry. I should just see what they actually have in them, because it seems like they should all be independent enough.
Well, if someone doesn't like our Spanish translation for something, I'm wondering if preloading it for people will prevent them from being able to change the translated text.
Oh, I see.
Because we're going to want to have our translation statement at the very, very beginning of the YAML file. And if someone else wants to translate any of the system phrases, they have to do the same thing. They have to load their file at the very beginning.
Like before.
Is it handled?
ours, or
Before the other text.
Okay.
Or any other
Before the
includes,
other
or
text?
anything that, before any blocks that use that translation are loaded.
So it's the opposite of how DocAssemble normally works,
Kind of is.
with the last thing being loaded.
But what I don't know is if you load both,
Okay.
will the earlier thing override it? I don't think so. I think it just won't show if it's not available yet.
Okay.
All right, so you can see here, this is actually, there's all of these lines. And I think I'm gonna have to move.
Okay.
All right, yeah. Let me
Cool,
just,
that's fair.
okay. All right, hold on. While I pull this up, I'm going to stop my screen share and move for a second. Sorry.
Up everything.
Okay, so I'll try to give an overview while I get settled in, but or ask questions, I guess, that seem relevant, I suppose. But I don't know if that's a very good direction or not. But.
Okay, so translation files are included?
Translation files are referenced. They have to be referenced at the beginning of your YAML block in order to translate any text that comes after them.
Any text that comes after them? So
yeah.
is that like an include thing? Like does it work the same way that include works for other YAML files?
It's similar to the way that include works. Yeah.
Okay.
But the inheritance model is, I think, probably similar, where like if you translate a phrase twice, probably the later one wins. The only thing is you need to have, it has to happen earlier in the YAML file in order for it to get translated at all. That's what I was saying.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, there might not be a way for other people to overwrite our translations for stuff.
I think we can do that in a pretty modular way. We could say, hey, if for some reason it's really important that you override the text, don't include our assembly line YAML, include these other YAMLs in this order. I think that should be fine.
Could we have a thing that includes the translations?
The problem is then, like, you still have the same developer friction. So right now, people could already include the translations, right? We don't make it available in one file,
But what usually
But we
happens
could
is
make
people
it
just jump
available
to
in
doing the
one file.
translation and then they've paid for it and they waste money and time.
We could have a commented out block that includes the translations.
Sure what you mean, but how that would help. You think
Well,
saying,
then they would at least be aware they're available. Like they would go, okay, so
or
what does Helm translate?
in their actual interview, not in an included file?
So like the included file would have the translations, the file to include would have the translations, but the block that would include the file in the interview in the Weaver would have a commented out include. Bryce, does anyone know what I'm talking
I
about?
get what you're saying. I'm just trying to think through like
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know
so
about
it's like
code.
it takes a little while to get to that benefit, right? Because then it has to be newly weaved files, and then they have to see that line. I'm trying to think about whether it would help reduce the friction in a way that has enough benefit, because it seems to be like the more mature interviews are the ones that are getting translated. So it might take really quite a while to get to that. I mean, the idea that I
thought
have
you
is like
were
a little
suggesting-
speculative anyway, because it's like, yeah, okay. So I think I could solve the very small issue that I just mentioned, which is the order matters, by just having an alternate way for people to load assembly line or very clear instructions when they run into this very specific use case, which is, I don't like the assembly line translation, and they don't want to make a pull request with the improved translation, and we don't agree that it's good for everybody, which I think is unlikely. But if that happens,
But then they have to lose everything else as well, don't they?
no, they just have to. So the translation files are going to be in the assembly line, so they could copy it in and just change the text they wanted. They only have to include it in a specific order that we can instruct them to do. Since that's like the very rare
Okay.
scenario, I think I'm fine just writing that down as an issue to consider, without trying to make that super easy to do. Just possible, as I think all that's necessary, not super easy. Okay.
Just FYI, you're not sharing your screen anymore, which is fine. Just don't know if
Yeah,
that was intentional.
I'm writing it into the notes, but I will share my screen so everyone can see it. Yeah, I knew it. I was just not in a rush. Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So just like one more bit of context, I guess. So you see here how it says the name of the file that it's coming from. That doesn't really matter. What really matters is the hash, but it tends to be that there's spacing differences, so you rarely see the exact same text in different files with the same hash, right? Like that doesn't happen that often. So it's like this is from the housing code checklist. We paid for this translation. Some of it's probably out of date. It's the first, and then through AL Massachusetts, it's the first 230 lines, 225 lines of the translation file. So it's not that huge. We could kind of like consider like a translation mining project where we look through and see, is your text really similar to other text someone just used in their interview? And basically, I guess it's translation memory. Yeah. So the idea is like to save people from retranslating those lines that are the same. And it's only a couple hundred lines, I guess. Let's see. Did that prompt any thoughts from anybody? I don't necessarily have to show something else next.
I think the only thing I don't know how. I guess we would need to just do an actual code deep dive for this to figure out what DocAssemble actually does with them. I'm still confused on how it's loading them. The documentation doesn't actually really say how it's loading them, and so I just don't really quite understand. I know like with includes, it's like it finds all the includes first and then just like loads them in at that spot. But I don't know how that works for the translations or what it's doing. And so I guess we would just need to do a deep dive for that. And if we want to do that now, we could, but yeah,
So
I would lean towards, the only thing the only thing I was gonna say is that I would lean towards like I'm all for including as many of this, like many of them as we can. And if there is some sort of weird performance thing, we fix it upstream, because it really shouldn't be a huge issue. And if it is, it's probably fixable, or at least probably like delayable. And like, oh, if it's doing all of this extra weird loading up front, can we not do that up front? So it doesn't take 10 seconds each time someone loads the interview or something, and it only takes the 1 second when they switch to their specific language or whatever.
Okay. And so, I mean, I will say, like, I've used most of my largest interviews that I use the most often are translated. So I haven't seen a huge performance issue. I haven't observed a problem with it. So it probably isn't significant enough to worry about. But let's see. This is what it looks like. So maybe I should do that here in this file. It really has to be the very first few lines. Yeah, so it's just this block at the beginning. You just list the files, and it has to be the beginning of the file. I could have probably just made it this include and make it the very first include. That should have worked too. I don't really know why in this case I decided to put it up there. I think it's because I was debugging and I was like, oh, that was like, why isn't the translation loading? And then I remembered, because I always have to relearn that lesson. Okay, so just give it a try. This is kind of what it sounds like. And maybe try to look for the code.
Yeah.
Does anything seem more urgent than trying to look for the code now? None of these seem to be super urgent. Maybe the multi-select one.
Multi-select one, just because we've been iterating on it asynchronously. I don't think we've had an actual synchronous discussion about it yet.
Yeah. All right. So that's an AL toolbox. So we've all tried the multi-select. So we don't have to describe what it is.
Yeah.
I had found two alternatives, but for some reason, I only wrote down one of them. And one was a double. I assume people caught that.
My general thought on this, I am generally skeptical of most alternatives. I feel like the ones that are like, I think the one we have is fine, and I don't think any other alternative we get is going to be like incredibly better, or like it might have a much better UI, but like absolutely not accessible again. Like it's just one of those, I don't really think, and I guess I'm mostly just approaching this from like, it's a new widget, it needs to be accessible from like a screen reader perspective. And my experience with these so far has been no one gives a thought to accessibility when they're doing these. It's like maybe an afterthought, and maybe they'll do things. I think some of them were like, had open PRs that were like, hey, we can make this a little bit more accessible, and they've been open for like 2 years sort of thing. So
okay.
I mean, most of these haven't been added for 2 years, so yeah.
So you'd already looked at accessibility of this one, right? A little bit.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot. I wrote down what my vague thoughts were. If I remember correctly, it was something like they were both slightly, like they were both okay. Neither of them were great, but one was one slight. Yeah, one was slightly better.
How's our current one?
So the current one is the David Stutz one. So I meant to link to two alternatives, but actually the current one's the David Stutz one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's really only one alternative, the snap appointment.
Sure, but is our current one accessible? Is it better than the others?
That's what I think Bryce was just saying. Like that's the one he's looked at. And you're wondering, I thought he said that it was pretty good, but
They're both
it has its own issues.
fine. I don't remember. Yeah, I guess I didn't write a ton of
Including
details
our
there.
current one. Like, if
Our,
our
yes, by
if
both, I mean our current
one-
and this
Oh,
other
I do
one.
say here that staff appointments was better, actually.
It was really slightly better, and it was mostly there was a PR that I like couldn't easily test. And I didn't know if it would actually help things, but I guess it's only been
Okay.
open for a year, but like, yeah.
Hmm.
Because if our current one is just as bad as the rest of them, then we might as well use another one that we think is more up to date with Bootstrap or whatever. I mean,
You said this has
like
a
if we're
bootstrap.
planning them to
Yeah.
fork, if we're planning to fork them anyway, then and
mean, it
they're
does-
just as good as each other, just as bad as each other, then you know.
Well, there is an issue with this alternative, which is not collapsible. And I think that's a UX philosophy, which is
Mm.
worth considering. So there's two things.
Yeah.
Like one is, do we like the appearance of the current widget and the functions it offers? The other one is, we have a better maintenance path. It's maintenance and appearance. I think we have to consider both of those, I suppose. And then like with the things that are clearly just UX bugs, does it seem more approachable to fix them in one versus the other? I suppose that's worth thinking about too. I imagine that
Yeah.
this issue of like the collapse only being on the arrow is not hard to fix if we're editing the source code.
Mhm.
That doesn't seem like it'll be that hard to fix. But
Yeah, that's fair.
No.
um,
Okay.
so this is how this one looks. It seems like it's fine. I will say like the current one, it's slowed down to kind of a crawl. Like it makes the page slow with just,
When you added like
Items.
700 things to it, right?
no, with the current list, which is a lot smaller.
Really? Even the like
Yeah.
51 list or whatever? How many? I don't know. Remember how
Let me
many
see actually
you
how long it is.
pulled it down to? This is Weaver stuff, right?
This is in the Weaver, yeah.
Merged Weaver stuff? I think it was. I think that stuff was merged.
Two 225 items, I guess. So
Yeah.
it's noticeably laggy on that page. I haven't
Okay.
tried the Snap Appointments one with that many items, but one negative
Mhm.
about it, right, is that it's quite long. So the benefit of seeing all the items at once is kind of gone. And you don't get an overview like you do with the hierarchical one. So you really are relying on the search. Part of this is that DocAssemble doesn't have like an Ajax input that dynamically loads that you can select more than one item. That's an alternative. But then it seemed like the most I select was
How does the Ajax
Right.
currently work? I thought the Ajax does do dynamic loading.
one item at a time. It also only refreshes after like a second, like after you type. You have to type 2 letters to start it
Yeah.
triggering. It's a really not a very good widget component.
I mean, we could do some improvements there too.
Yeah.
I do think I was going to say, honestly, it's like one of those, I think Bootstrap Select, it might not be exactly what we're looking for. It's hands down a better option than whatever the hell the multi-select is in DocAssemble now, which I like abhor.
Well, it's
Because
just
you
like the
have to
native.
control click everything. And I don't think it's, I just don't like the multi-select now. But all that to say, I think whatever we do, I don't think we would have the maintenance ability to like, my views we're going to have to fork something to get it close to how we actually want in terms of performance and in terms of like features and stuff. We're probably going to have to fork something. I don't think we will have the maintenance ability to like keep it up to date and do smaller fixes and stuff like that. So I think we should get something working and then see if we can convince Jonathan to sort of bring it into DocAssemble in the same way that he's done with the like current, what's the current one that's in there? The current, like the combo box one.
Oh,
Like, I think, like, because that combo box is like he's forked it, is essentially that he's forked a thing in the sources in DocAssemble now, and he's manually made a bunch of changes that are pretty different than what the existing one is. And so I think that's the best long-term support for it if we wanted to do something like this.
But he
Okay.
doesn't really
That's something to think
long-term
about.
support very much, right? He
Yeah.
kinda doesn't
I
have
mean, he
the
just makes
bandwidth.
it
No.
sure it still works on the new version. versus
Yeah.
This Java.
And he adds stuff to it. He's added a bunch of stuff to the combo box.
That's true.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, like accessibility changes you suggested, right?
I suggested accessibility changes, yeah. But he's been adding small things since then and before then too.
Well, I think this one seems less opinionated, to be honest, but it
Mhm.
doesn't seem quite as suitable for item or a list of 200 items to me.
I guess the thing is if it's, I don't know how bad it actually is with 200 items, but if it's one of those, anything that is using a whole bunch of weird DOM adding and removing stuff like this, which essentially is going to be all of our solutions. We're not going to have anything that's like browser native that I think has the features we want. I don't know how performant any of that would be. And so unless we find a magic bullet of some web dev genius who has made something that can handle like thousands of options in page and isn't laggy, then it's going to have to be like a search thing. And even when you get to 1,000 options, I don't think having a like collapsing 3 levels of depth would be that useful. You'll have to have search at some point. So
you do need search at some point, yeah. If you could just like have an Ajax input that was dynamic and let you keep adding items, it would probably be better than this approach because there's a limit to how much you want to load in memory anyway. But I mean, 200 was acceptable. That was why I still submitted that pull request as is.
Yeah, that's right.
It was like you notice, oh, this page is a little slower when I click an input for things to update, but it wasn't impossible to use. Just it was enough to be noticeable. All right, well, I'm just not hearing anything super convincing that says we should switch to this one yet. Am I reading people right? I guess I would say the devil we know.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, to me, it depends on what features.
We've used the other one like over 2 years on different projects, but sorry, go ahead, Michelle. I was interrupting you.
I haven't seen our multi-select for ours, whether it does check marks and other stuff.
It does not do check marks.
Um,
There is a way it does indicate selection somehow.
It does do check. What do you mean by it doesn't do check marks?
Well, I do actually like these really clear check marks next to the items you've highlighted. Makes it really easy.
Here, I have ours up if you'll
Yeah, go ahead and
screen
share it.
like
That'd
if
be
it's just collapsing, that's the problem. We can add a bootstrap collapse in there fairly easily, I think.
Why would we
Should
wait?
be
I'm
able
confused
to.
by what we would use a bootstrap collapse for. Oh, for the
This
new
is
one.
in Bootstrap, yeah, if we use the Bootstrap thing.
This is what ours currently looks like now. There's a search.
I see.
It does work. And then, I guess the one thing that you've pointed out, Quentin, that we like is that you only have to click that very small,
Yeah, and the
target,
spacing is
which is
wonky,
bad.
too.
Spacing's
Yeah.
kind of wonky. those are things that I think if we
Those are-
forked it,
Yeah, those we
changed
can
to
fix
doable.
pretty easily.
It's
Forgot
mostly
what
just
ours
flooding these
looked
other
like.
parts.
And the other thing is we have to like backport, like I compiled it
And
at one
also
point.
it doesn't
We have to
collapse.
backport it.
One, it goes below the page, and two, it doesn't collapse, which we can change with CSS, but
What
it,
doesn't,
you
Does-
said once, Quentin, that like the second or third time you open it or something like that, it again
Oh,
doesn't collapse.
there's a bug somewhere with that. Okay,
There's a
that
bug.
does sound kind of familiar. I don't think maybe I hadn't written that down, or maybe it's in the notes, and that's why. If you click
Yeah, the way
link,
this works is that it will just go below the screen.
once you've searched,
But
it
we can
does
do
not work quite as
that,
well.
yeah.
Are you? I'm surprised that I don't see the search icon there. I know. I thought I got that working, but maybe it's because you're running a slightly different version.
I'm probably a slightly different version. I just installed, it's on my local server and I just installed from main.
Remain. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I thought I'd merged all the. Huh. And you're on Firefox too.
Yep. No console errors that I see.
It's like a Z level issue, but okay.
Might be. Yeah,
Um,
okay, that's it.
CSS thing. It wasn't a JavaScript error. It was something you would fix. I just copied in.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
I mean, it's a long list of top level categories, so it is still not that great, but I do think getting kind of a quick overview is helpful for people.
Yeah,
All right. So what we did now is like I copied in the minified and compiled JavaScript from the source, and we've made some fixes right there in line. So we really need to do this the right way. We need to have there be a build, like have the sources in the build step happen before we edit it in AL Toolbox. Maybe in AL Toolbox is where we just put the whole source. I don't see a real, or do we want to maintain it in a separate repository as a fork?
Oh, I see.
I'm not
Where do we
super
edit
familiar
the
with-
plugin?
I'm not super familiar with what we should do.
Yeah.
Specifically, like if we wanted to do an actual like build step, then I don't know where we could do the kind of janky thing that DocSimple currently does, which is there's not a build step and it's just here's the hard-coded file, like hard-coded minifile or minified file that is in source, and like here are some, for us it would be here are some documented steps to take the unminified source and like run two scripts on it to minify it and like compile it or whatever. If it's
Yeah,
ES6, I don't know if it is, but
That's fine. So it's TypeScript, which, or at least I did it in the TypeScript
Okay.
version. I think there's ES6 and a TypeScript option. And I mean, I think it's nice to have the TypeScript version, but
okay.
So yeah, when I say a build step, I just mean like we put all the sources in there and we say run the build command, whatever it is. It doesn't have to necessarily be an automated
Actual
build,
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
because I don't imagine no frequent changes to it. To be honest, it's a small component, right? Like there's a ton of features. Maybe we even want to strip some of those out that we're not using. That might help with speed. And a component like this isn't something that should have to get updated a lot unless you want to change the way it looks.
That's
Well,
fair.
but at the beginning, we'll at least be changing it a lot as we find bugs, etc.
I just see it.
Maybe,
Let's see.
yeah.
I mean, that's what happened with every other
Yeah.
thing. So I'm like, I'm just.
Well, yeah, I don't want to. I wish there was just like a thing off the shelf we could use. I'm still not totally to terms with like having to fork and maintain something like this, but it's small enough. It's not like we're taking over maintaining a giant project. We're just saying this is a very specific thing I'm trying to do.
Okay.
Are you profiling it?
I was trying to profile and then it shows me all of my tabs, which is not what I wanted. So, okay, I'll figure that out.
I'm sure it's doing something inefficient that could be improved, because I don't think having to load 200 items should slow down. It might be something to do with DocAssemble's trying to add advanced items. That's an issue.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't actually know what the source looks like here.
So it's behind a show if, and I think that might be related to this speed issue. But I'm not 100% positive. Maybe we don't even need it to be on a show up on that page,
Yeah.
because I do think every file has a category, right? Like there's not necessarily, at some point Lily had made this optional if you had a court, if it was a court related form, but I don't think it really is contingent on that.
No, yeah. All the things are pretty broad that even non-court related forms like just benefits stuff that we also work on a lot falls under a lot of these.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we have a conclusion. We don't necessarily have like a person assigned to work on it or anything, but all right.
Yeah.
So basically the decision is stick with the current plugin. Use a copy of the source in the AL toolbox somewhere. The source to fix the issues. I mean, I guess it's harder for us to contribute upstream if we embed it in our repo, but no one's maintaining upstream. So I don't see that as a huge issue.
Yeah.
I guess we should make sure we can still do diffs on the source and however we copy it in. That's the only thing that would be nice.
What?
So that,
Okay,
all right.
that's fine.
So you all both looked at it. I went through all the things I was thinking about. Is there anything else that you all were thinking about when you looked at them both that we didn't cover that we could benefit from discussing live here?
Looked at which both?
You both looked at this issue and you had your own thoughts in the discussion. Is there anything we didn't cover that would be nice to cover on this meeting
Not that
related to the multi-select plugin?
Not
I
anymore.
can remember.
The only other like actiony item is that if we're sticking with the current one, I should do a better like if we're sticking with the current one and we're working, I should do a better accessibility like audit of it and just make sure it's and see if there's anything we can add. Accessibility gets weird when you have all these kind of complicated like widgets and there aren't a ton of like a lot of accessibility advice ends up being like, oh, just use the simpler thing, like use the select drop down. It doesn't matter if there are 500 because it's usable with the screen reader. And that's nice. And we can try and do that stuff, but it's one of those, if we really want to not do that, then we have to figure out some way of making it work.
Yeah.
So
That's fair enough. I mean, I just can't think of another way to do what we're trying to do on this page.
well, I mean, okay, so we can, it's just a multi-select. Like that, if we want the extra features, if you want the extra features of what we're doing, then yeah, you need all these extra things. But like the the data input is a multi-select.
So we
it's a fancy multi-select.
That was right to it, you're saying, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's like the general, me trying to summarize the accessibility stuff that I have seen, it ends up being like, use the simplest thing you can. And that would be a multi-select, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know that I recommend someone uses this outside of these kind of more advanced interviews, although obviously we're using it for the transfer lane project one.
I'd argue that's a more advanced interview though, because that is meant for like expert users. So.
Right. And I think in the Weaver, we can, some people are going to be first-time users of it, but they can be, they can figure it out. But I would try to push this on a pro se litigant.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So, but then the question is, we still would like our tools to be accessible. That's an important thing for developers to be able to use it. So, should we make an option that says use the regular multi-select instead of this? I'm trying to think of how we can have that fall back without harming the user experience for people who don't need the accessible version.
I don't
It's
think
kind of clunky to me. But
it's kind of clunky, and also there's not a good way to say like, ignore me or do the other thing. That's like another like rule of thumb is don't try and do different things for people using screen readers or whatever. Like they should get the same content, and we could make that a option on page, but you're right, that makes it really clunky and no one will know what that means. And we show them an option that's like, you give me a simpler way to select this, like they're going to be like, what?
Yeah. All right. Okay, so we're just going to try to improve the accessibility. That's kind of where we landed, I think, on that.
Yeah, we'll just have to try and improve it as best we can.
Okay. Looking up and down now. Got about an hour. We started early. We don't have to use all of that time.
Mhm.
Should we jump now to trying to see if we can find where the translation file logic loading happens in assembly line or in DocAssemble?
Sure. I'd be down for that.
Does that sound okay to you, Michelle? That might be, we
Sure.
can time box it, maybe take
Sure.
15 minutes to look at it.
It's gonna be more than 15 minutes, but yeah.
Check in 15 minutes. Oh, I'm gonna change. I was already on master. What is this? I don't really quite know where to start other than just finding some strings.
I was gonna say that I had done the same thing because I had it up when we were talking about it earlier. Parse.py and
Oh.
line 2215 is where
Base, or is it in web app?
parse is in base. Yeah, it's in base.
You said 2000?
Yeah, 2215. Oh, it's still there. Oh, yeah, slightly different version, but it's 111 or it's 11 here.
Oh, okay.
And this is just if there's a translations. I think this the whole thing is in like if it's looking at a question block, if there's a translation attribute in that block. And my experience of trying to find things in DocAssemble is you have to find where it is and like what the actual Python thing it gets set to, and then that is used somewhere completely different.
This data translations, in other words. Yeah, and that's not actually the name of the. Oh no, okay, we're adding it somewhere. So let's see. TR to do.
Mhm.
So this seems to happen at the loading of the YAML block, right?
Yeah, yes. I think I don't remember the exact set, but it's like the question in it block. And I think that like it makes those when it loads the interview first.
Mm-hmm. So it's when it's compiled, potentially?
Yes, I think so.
So it may not have to happen every time it loads.
I'm fingers crossed that it's when it's compiles, because it would be horrible if this is every time it loads. I don't think it has to. I don't think it remakes the entire interview object on each screen.
I mean, I think parse happens when things load anyway. I think that's where the level we're looking at, right? Like as far as
Just,
loading.
I
this
don't
seems
trust
to
it.
be about parsing the YAML file, which I think
Yeah.
happens actually, but does not happen on screen load. I think it happens earlier than that. Because DocAssemble compiles. Oh, it's the Python. There is a step of changing a file that requires it to be recompiled. I guess that might not happen when you change the YAML.
So what are we, okay. So it happens
You're right.
before page load.
It's definitely
think-
before
yeah.
page load. Yeah. Because it's loading the whole YAML before the page loads.
Okay.
But we're not sure if it happens before every page load or if it just happens on like session start once and then it uses the same thing for each page load.
So what it's doing right now, okay, so it uses pandas to read the whole Excel file, and pandas is pretty efficient.
Yeah.
So it is going to be loading however number of Excel files we have. Those will have to be loaded. At least a minimum of once per interview load. Maybe at session start. In the best case, I guess it's hard to see it happening much earlier than the session start. It's not part of the compiled Python.
And it just puts everything in the translation dict in the interview.
Okay, so it loads everything there into memory. We're talking about 300 lines per language at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, that should be quick. That shouldn't be super hard or super slow. It's not nested. It doesn't do nested cores. It's only one nested core. That's not the worst.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's the good question, right? Like, where do we want to load these translation files? And I think, should we have them? I'm kind of tempted to translate the mass access strings in assembly line to reduce that overhead. But that's like a little very much detail. Let's see actually how many lines that was. Yeah, Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of all of this, like getting and opening the file is the thing that would take the longest.
So it's 15 extra lines, which may not apply to other states,
Mhm.
but I'm tempted to just put them in there to
Yeah,
avoid the extra overhead of more Excel files
I think that's
for
fine.
our
Yeah.
interviews.
Yeah. 15 extra is not too bad. And 100% it can go through those 15 lines quicker than it would take to using S3, get the file and then open it and read it. So using
Yes.
pandas. Yeah.
But it's mostly just benefiting us. But
Yes. Yeah.
okay. Okay. I mean, I think this is a good idea, right? Do other people agree? Just to do this to slightly improve developer experience when they translate interviews and avoid wasted money and time for them.
Yeah, I think that's the more important thing. Like this is one of the few time, not few. This is one of the times where it's like, yeah, a bit of extra compute for saving actual money somewhere else is good. So
And we'll include instructions to not load them, but the default will be they're loaded rather than not loaded, and you have to add a line to or edit a line to turn them on.
mhm.
Just document it somewhere.
I mean, if things slow down, we'll see, you know.
Well,
And I guess actually I was gonna say this actually answers the question of how they're loaded. They should be loaded last overwrites the other thing. So because it will be
Point.
for block or for the block. It's looking at like each of the translation files you include. So the later the translation file is, it will just overwrite whatever is in interview.translation dict. And then if it's a question that's loaded later, the question, I guess we can double check that, but or we don't have to, we could at some point. The questions I'm pretty sure are loaded from just like start or it includes all the other YAML files so that every question block is top to bottom, just contiguous, and then it would go through and initiate all of those or init all of those. And then if there's a translate one at the very bottom of someone's like main interview file, that would be the last one loaded, and that would be the last thing that's overwritten into that translation picked, is what it looks like should happen.
Oh, so maybe if you do load it later,
Mhm.
as long as that string has already been marked as one that has a translation, it'll get overwritten. Because I do know
Yes.
for sure if it's not in the translation file, if the translation file is not loaded at the beginning of the YAML,
Mhm.
it won't apply the translation. I do know that. That maybe
Okay.
a later one overwrites it.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the matter. We don't know when this question init is called, and if we knew that, that would answer these other questions. But as another thing, like you said, there's a way around it, and we don't have to. It's not like we can document the way around it, and if we figure out there's a slightly easier way, we can just change our documentation. So
Yeah, that's true. And I'm not. This isn't really important either, but it seems like we could use an xlif file. It's just looking right now. It looks like it might be more complicated instead of simpler for how Docassemble loads it in. It might use more memory instead of less.
I think it depends on how pandas.read Excel is probably hiding a whole lot of complexity there, but yeah, I don't think think parsing it is the thing that would take a long time.
Just as a clarification for me,
Mhm.
how are people going to know that stuff is already being translated unless they go there with a language?
When they generate the
browser.
translation file, those phrases will just appear as already translated. That's what we're trying to get to let them get that benefit without having to go through some cumbersome steps. We were trying to explain this to a student this spring and failed. And I was like, oh, you know what? Lots of people have to translate stuff. It'd be nice if it was just already there. So I didn't have to tell people to delete the first 200 lines and we'll copy those in somewhere else.
Mm.
And as a result, they kind of didn't do the translation in an efficient way because they hadn't. So I was trying to explain to them, don't translate those 200 lines, and they didn't get it, and we weren't involved enough to stop them from doing the wrong thing. But I think if it had already been really clearly like these are already done, just keep going down to get to the empty lines.
Okay, got it.
Essentially, when you create the translation file in Docassemble, and we actually use our own system for it now, which is basically just a fork of Jonathan's. Probably show you this. There's probably some newly translated string and some that are already translated. I can show you. Let's see.
I didn't know it would generate them translations as well. That if that's the way it works, then that's great. I think that's great. Like if it's translated elsewhere and it comes through there, then yeah.
Looking for the dashboard menu item, but I don't see it. Weird. So if I go to prepare translation files, I found it very tedious to do it with the old system. So I would always miss something. So being able to generate more than one at once was really useful. Okay, so there's some lines that are already translated and some that are not. So apparently only about 25% of these lines are translated.
Okay.
It's a little unnecessary precision there.
Well, I mean,
That was the other reason
at
I
the
wrote
place
that.
you could tell. Anyway,
So now I've downloaded this. I don't think it's actually open yet. I think this is the other one. Yeah, okay. So you can see these lines have changed somewhere.
okay.
So they're no longer shown as translated,
Mhm,
but this first line is the same document.
mhm,
So this is what you would see. You'd see some things translated and some things not.
mhm.
We could try to run reports and help us update this and say, hey, oh, someone else just did a translation.
Mhm,
What was their translation result? Let's try to integrate it upstream if we can.
mhm.
Actually see a lot of new lines.
I'm
But
curious
those
what's
might-
going on with LLMs in translation, but that's a different question.
Well,
They're just slightly more cumbersome ways of doing
Yeah.
Google Translate, honestly. It's the same
Google
tech, it's
Translate's
just
already
slightly bigger.
using a generative pre-trained transformer. It's just LLM is not, yeah. It's the same technique, but more
Okay.
specialized for machine translation.
I meant like to translate stuff dynamically for a person when they go to various web pages.
That
There's
is
an
the
API.
same thing.
Google has an
Oh,
API
okay.
for that. We could use it. It's just not very trustworthy.
Yeah.
To show every, there's like legal consequences. Times
Yeah.
it will make
Yeah.
mistakes like about the word not, the right sense, but it has the negation in the wrong way. That's really could have really significant impacts. So I
Okay.
think you always need a human to review translations.
Okay. So ChatGPT-4 doesn't provide enough of an improvement on that. Okay.
It's actually, yeah, it's worse than regular Google Translate because it's more general purpose and not as fine-tuned for that exact use case, which is pretty well. That was like kind of the first way people were
I
using
thought I'd understood that was one of the things it was stronger at, was translation. Okay, no worries.
Could be wrong. Don't think.
Like, I think it's like Quinn said, it is stronger at it, but it's like Google Translate is already using sort of like a generative AI approach. It's just more tailored to specifically translating things than
Okay,
than ChatGPT would be.
okay. Sounds good then.
It's a good time-saving technique for translators, and I think that most translators probably are using it. But hopefully, if we're paying them, they're doing a good job of reviewing, and they're a trusted translator.
Yeah. Sure.
It would be foolish to do it line by line if you understand the language and can review it and feel confident that you're doing it safely. But
Yeah. Well, DocAssemble spreadsheets would be hard to translate because they've got code that shouldn't be translated.
that is true.
So I was thinking of the direct page translation, but
Well, we could do that. But yeah, the issue is just the quality.
yeah, that's a serious issue.
It might even be like 90%, right? That's great for like just a general sense of understanding what the page is about, but not so great when you're trying to explain someone's legal rights. It's better to let them make that choice on their own
Yeah.
than to make it for them and give them a false sense that it's accurate.
Yep. I'm convinced.
Okay, sorry. I need to
Yeah.
labor it. Discussion I've had a few times. That's all. So let's think about it. All right. I mean, it's funny. It's like, oh yeah, you can use LMs for all these things, but it's like, the thing is that when you're translating text, English, if you're doing all your work in English, and you're generating text that people can review and edit, they understand both sides of it, right? Like they understand the English.
Mhm.
So they may not understand it at the right level. There's still a risk of them missing something that is generated and not fixing it, but at least they have a
Yeah.
chance. Whereas if they don't understand the source language at all, there's no way for them to know that it's mistaken.
Yeah.
So I'm convincing myself whether LLMs for that kinds of generative stuff are safer. I think that for that reason. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk?
Do we want to
we jump
note
to the
any of
ALKiln
that
stuff?
down, or did you already note that stuff down?
Sure, we can add that as more of a separate discussion, I guess. But
I think the S3 thing, we're just going to have to make an API request to get the config for the S3 key. I don't know what it is, so if someone knows what it is, that'll save me a few minutes, and then find some kind of node library. The other option is to have ALKiln in the playground pass the files from S3 to ALKiln.
so this is
But
in
that
doc
seemed
symbol interview, right?
ridiculous. That's in so the doc assemble, the ALKiln in the playground.
Yeah.
Will need to, there are other times as well where GitHub, I think, also needs to get stuff from S3. So it just may be better just to hand, is there
So doc assemble has
Yeah.
built-in ways to get the path of the file, and we should probably just use those ways. Are you already doing that though? Don't want to tell you things you're already
Path of the file.
doing.
Like it doesn't need S3 credentials, right? We weren't doing anything special for S3 before ALKiln in the playground, and it was fine. So,
We also weren't doing S3 stuff though, correctly.
but it was working for Michael, which means it was working on S3. I don't know why.
Okay.
I
There's
don't know
no
why it
reason you
worked on
can't use-
S3 for GitHub, but it didn't work on S3 for the in the playground version.
So there's no reason you can't use S3. That really should be pretty transparent. I just want to see like what's the way you're getting the file path right now.
Right
Is
now
this
we're
happening
using
in Kiln or in Kiln the playground?
so it's happening in Kiln. But the problem isn't getting the file path at the moment. The problem is getting the files themselves. At least for ALKiln in the playground, I believe that's the blocker. Maybe this is a good thing to try and troubleshoot. I
I'm a
believe
little
the blocker.
confused. Isn't if you can get the file path, you should be able to get the file. Those should be the same.
Not from S3. From S3, you need permission to get the file. Even if you know the file path, you need permission. You need to be able to get the file from S3 itself, from where it's storing it in the database.
Could you just
That's
use the
what I'm
Docassemble
understanding.
API to get the file? So what do you mean when you say the file path? Then maybe that's, I think we might be using different vocabulary.
The file path, just, I mean, you have to access it in the right context, but you just need the directory, the directories and the name, right?
The directory
file.
on the Docassemble container.
No, I
Right.
mean, not for S3. Usually, yes, but not for S3. From what I'm understanding, like for right now, what we're doing to get the files on a server that's using S3 is we're looking in the temp folder. But Jonathan said that the temp folder does not like keep references of that stuff around, does not keep those files around. And so this would especially be a problem with Elkiln in the playground, because someone could come back to a project a month later and try to run tests on it, and the files wouldn't be in the temp folder anymore. That is my understanding of the situation.
I think that's if it's the server's restarted. I think the folder's cleaned out. I don't know if it's a cron job that cleans it
I
out.
don't think there's a cron job, but yeah.
We don't have an API key for the server, do we?
We do.
We do, yeah, for the DocAssemble server, just not for the S3 server. We can get.
Is that
the
a secret that's always present? I thought it wasn't required anymore. Or did we switch to always using the API?
We switched to always using the API
Okay.
key to
Okay.
run kill and stuff.
Great, then let's just get I think there's an API for this.
We can get the config, and the config should have the S3.
Yeah,
I partially want to make sure that I have the picture right for what we're doing and what
Okay.
needs to be done.
let's use this API, playground get, to get the file. Then it doesn't matter whether they happen to be using S3 or not. Because there's no guarantee that people are using S3.
How do we use playground get?
Turn a list of files.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, Quinn. Just to clarify,
No,
this
but-
is Python code running from DocAssemble that is like setting up and calling.
It's
Kiln
not
stuff.
it's not in the
It's not-
current. But
Oh.
Elkiln is running the current interviews, so Elkiln could request. I mean, it requests other stuff
But it doesn't need
from
an
the
API key
current
when you do Kiln
interviews. So
Playground,
maybe
does it?
what?
But does Kiln need the playground? When you use Kiln in the playground, sorry, have you provided an API key somewhere? I guess we could require you to do that.
No, but it doesn't matter. Elkiln can do the same stuff either way.
I'm thinking through, I know it's vague, like what my question was trying to get to.
Okay.
When you use Kiln in the playground, do you know if you have an API key? Is that required to run Kiln in the playground?
No. Oh, yes, sorry.
is
still?
Yes, it's still required. It's in the. It must still be required.
Well,
right?
no, because see, you need the API key to set up the
Oh, right.
to set
so
everything up,
we
and then
don't
once you
the
have it all
API
set
key.
up, you just need the URL to go to.
Right, so this would require the API key no matter what we do, really.
No. Well, this would, if this using this method would.
Using any method,
Hmm.
No.
right?
No, this is only one potential way to do it. And so I was that maybe it's a dead end.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't
We're
discount
running
it, because
Kiln
if we
from
don't have to
server.
access S3 itself, that's already an improvement.
Well,
Yeah, we don't want to.
We're gonna
We
have
don't
to
want to
access.
store the S3 password anywhere. That's not a good idea.
No, yeah, I don't think we want to. I think we're gonna have to go through S3, and I
You
had
think
sort
we
of
will have
assumed. Yeah,
Well, then we're gonna need the API key.
but we can go through S3 through like DocAssemble. I had been assuming that DocAssemble has some functions that it calls to like download this file from S3, and
Right.
we should be able to use those. No,
Well,
feels like
Jonathan,
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like
Jonathan-
DocAssemble already has a way to like call, make Google, or like get it already has a way to make a Google Drive API using stuff that's in the config. I'd be
it's in
surprised
the
if there's.
config. That's what I'm saying. It's in the config, but we need the API key to get the config, because we can't get the config.
We don't
Or
have to. No.
we
Hold
could
up.
pass
Hold
it
up.
from the
Hold up.
playground, I suppose.
Hold up. To create the DocAssembles, to create the Google Drive API key from DocAssemble, you do not have. It's in the config. You, as the like person writing Python code running on DocAssemble, do not have to like know the config. You don't have to have an API key to get the config. You can always just call get config from Python code in Docassemble. So we don't need an API
All
key to
the
get that
contents are
anyway. Yeah, you don't need all the contents, but essentially, like, there's already a wrapper to set up the Google Drive API using get config, where it expects things to be in the Docassemble config. When and S3 is already set up in the Docassemble config because that's how Docassemble gets stuff from S3. And so I don't know if that's what I had been. I'm not entirely sure, but there should be some way that like Docassemble is getting things from S3 using what's already in the config. There shouldn't be anything else we need to do from Python, like
So let me re-explain.
passwords wise.
So let me re-explain.
Sure.
In Docassemble, you can get the files, but Docassemble isn't what needs the files. The thing that needs the files is ALKiln, which is not using Docassemble. So what I suggested before, what I said is a possible route is to send the files from ALKiln in the playground, but that seems like
I don't-
overkill.
Do we have
I
to
do-
send the
I-
files, or could we call, like, to somehow provide the path to the file?
But it
Yes.
doesn't matter if we have the path to the file because the file is on S3. So if
Well,
we
okay,
get the file
not.
Backing up
itself,
When you call .path, it will make sure that the file is local.
Yes, like, okay, so the file exists on S3, but to do anything with it, it has to be stored on the Docassemble container. That's why, like, the temp paths exist on Docassemble in the first place, because it always has to download something from S3, put it on the local file system, and then do something with it. That's how
So
that works, and that
Jonathan
would be
says
how
that
that
if-
works now. Or how we
Jonathan
would want to get it.
Jonathan says that if the interview doesn't actually use the file in the interview, which the file would not be used in the interview because it's just for ALKiln,
Mhm.
then it won't go to the temp folder all the time. That's what they
Not-
said.
I think
Not-
the .path
that's-
should do it.
Yeah, I'm thinking the Python code in ALKiln on the playground, it can do the same thing that Docassembles, like Jonathan said, Jonathan's right, like it's through just running the interview, that file wouldn't be downloaded. But it's downloading all the other files that the interview is using. ALKiln on the playground can use the same Python function to
What do you mean it's
download those files.
downloaded? What do you mean it's downloaded in all the other files? That
So I think
Say
in
that
the
one more
interview, you need some way to pass to ALKiln itself where the file exists in the world. So there's a couple of things we could try. One would be, okay, so here's .retrieve. This is you don't have to go down to the lower level API. You can just use the .retrieve method on the file, it looks like, to ensure that the file is local.
So would we retrieve all files in the source just automatically? Because we can't do it per test from ALKiln in the
I see
playground.
what you're saying. Could we just say, so where should people put the test files? They go in the sources folder?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, people
So we
need
just
enough space on their
retrieve-
server for every file that's on S3.
But won't that take, like, if they have big files they want to upload for the tests, won't that take a while to retrieve them, which might time out the test?
No, if it works going through, like if an interview possibly could generate something like that is a few megabytes, downloading a few megabytes from S3 is not going to take a while. And
But it
We
does
don't- we have
take,
max-
like, generating files does take a while.
we're not generating the files though, we're just downloading them. That was a weird way of, I scratch what I just said. It was a very weird way of saying it. We have max upload limits on like files you can upload to interviews, right? Like we have, I don't remember if it's 10 or 20, but it's something normal. We're not going to be uploading like 2 gigabyte files to a interview. And the size of the file is the only thing that's limited here. We'd have to download it from S3, and then we'd have to actually upload it in the interview. And the download is the only extra thing we're doing here.
Could we parse the feature file and just say, these are the files it uses? I agree it's not a bad idea if it's easy to do that.
Well, I mean, we can do that as well. Could we, I mean, Airkill in the playground doesn't have really access. I guess it could, has access to the, it's a lot of work. Access to the feature files, and it could parse them theoretically. But would it be conditional on, for example, people can just test with certain tags?
Well,
So we
so
also
so we
want to
said
do it
first, we were like,
here per
our
tag.
universe of files are going to be every file in the playground.
Every
for the
file
test
in the
person,
sources
in the
folder.
sources folder in the playground for that
Okay.
particular interview. That's our starting point. I guess
And-
retrieve probably doesn't do anything if the file's already on the system, which will probably be the case for people's tests they're actively developing, but maybe not for every test they have. So we can assume some percentage of the files will already be downloaded. I don't know how big a percentage, but some percentage.
In most cases, anyway.
Most cases, probably majority files for most uses. So we could even narrow it down to a smaller set of files that are in the sources folder if we parse the feature file. And it's a step we can take right before they run the particular test, right? Before they run that feature file, the test in that feature file. On a per feature file basis, probably shouldn't be too hard to do.
No, I mean, Airkill in the playground doesn't know what feature files. I mean, suppose it could use the tag they give to parse which tests, but it would have to look at all the feature files in order to find the ones with the right tags.
But you choose a particular feature file to run, or no, you just say all tests.
You can do all tests, or you can do tests by tag.
You can't say it by feature file, just by tag. Okay.
Yeah, you give a
Yeah.
feature file a tag. And then we need to, like, we need to do our own parsing of tags for feature files, of tag expressions, basically. We need to be able to
Maybe.
say the ors and the ands and the, like, we'd be parsing tags, which is a whole other thing. We could try and find a library that does that, but it is a whole other thing.
Yeah, I would agree that would be not
We're
ideal.
And we're really talking about, like, for a pretty small use case, right? Like, to minimize if people have really large files in their test that they want to upload.
Also worth, yeah, it's worth noting if people put huge files in their sources folder, that's still getting installed on the like server. If they aren't using it anywhere, then like it's still extra
their
stuff
least
that they
one.
have to deal with. Yeah, it has to, it's getting put somewhere. And if they are using it, we need to download it anyway. If they aren't using it, why is it there? And it's still slowing them down when
Right.
like they install something on the server.
I mean, like, the one
But we
exception is
could-
like .get folders. Those can be kind of tedious, but that doesn't really apply here.
But we could, like, I can potentially see parsing all the feature files for all the potential uploading
That just feels like a lot too. But
folders,
know.
but yeah, it is
there a
kind of a
Cucumber
lot.
API
I'm not
port
sure.
already? That lets you
What do you
see
mean?
well, no, because it's our specific.
the
like, steps.
concept of files is our own.
Well,
Like
yeah,
listing the
it's
files, we
yeah.
list them in a table. And no, I don't know.
Oh yeah, they're in the table too. Yeah,
They
that's
could
a lot
be in
harder.
a table, or they could be in a step.
That's
I
a lot
mean,
harder. Okay, I don't like that
Well,
at all.
basically, we'd look for all the strings in the second column.
Okay.
And
Yeah, and
see
then
if
try to
any of
determine
them
if it's-
match files in the
I think
sources folder.
let's
And
push that problem off the future.
Yeah.
Maybe we could even, if we're trying to figure out an MVP to avoid this potential risk, which we don't really know if people will have interviews that have this problem. What about a checkbox that says pre-download, or make sure we've cache all files, cache Playground files first, or something like that? Maybe explain what it does. So then we just run this retrieve step when the user explicitly has said they want to do it. Uploading files to an interview is an advanced test. Happens to be one we need to do a lot because it's part of the Weaver. But I'm okay with making it something we can do that doesn't inflict the pain on everybody if we figure out there really is a potential for pain.
I don't agree that it's a complex thing to do.
Uploading a file,
Yeah,
you think a lot of interviews might do it?
Yeah.
More than anything.
especially for like the more and more people want to like ask for evidence or pictures or like proof of something, like it feels like it will become more common and is. I wouldn't consider it. I wouldn't like to consider it a like expert thing to do because it's going to make it harder for
Eventually,
people to
we
start
want
using Kiln if we do.
and
Okay.
eventually we want to be able to like
Then let's
compare PDFs and docx's and
Let's not make it a feature, an optional feature then. Let's just,
Yeah.
I think it feels pretty safe to me to just retrieve every file. And then we can optimize it later if we do see, or make it a optional feature later.
so
If
I'm
we
just
find that
gonna,
people have a lot of really large files in their sources folder that they don't want to put on the server before they can run the test.
so retrieve in Playground to put files in temp. Is that what we're, so just to sum up what we are proposing. All sources files. So we would use retrieve to retrieve all the sources files in it, in the AL Kiln in the Playground interview. And that will put the files in temp. And then we will be able to retrieve the file. We will. Is it going to be different for static files?
People can upload static files as well.
Okay.
Is that the case?
We're only looking at sources for things to upload right now, at least.
That seems like a fair limit to me because it's just for the test, the feature files there.
Okay.
I'm fine with just having people also have to put their uploaded files for the test in the same location.
Okay.
And the only other thing that I was trying to figure out is just a very quick thing to get all of the sources files.
You can
I'm
do
not
that from
sure.
inside. Oh,
Without
is
Playground
there a
Git.
docsimple function that does that?
Yeah, I was trying to look around to see if there's one. There's
Okay.
Yeah.
There might not be, but we're doing that in various places. I mean, we already are doing that, right, Michelle? In order to see the feature files.
It only works
I'm
if all the
doing-
files are there. We're doing Globin.
We're gonna do this for the feature files as well that are in sources. So
Well, it
Like,
won't have to
we're
be two
doing the same
separate
stuff
steps.
for
We're
the
saying every
feature
file,
files.
so.
Huh?
It won't have to be two separate steps because we're saying every
Yeah,
file.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So it only works right
Um,
now if it's cached. Is that what you're saying? If it's locally available?
If
Yes,
it's
'cause it's
locally
assuming-
available in temp, yeah.
Okay.
It's assuming that everything is downloaded in some folder that we can just do a glob on. And then be
So-
like, oh, every file that ends with .feature.
Oh, okay. So this is good. So looking at this issue with uploaded files also revealed a potential bug with regular all Kiln tests.
Well, no,
but-
just S3.
Well, yeah, most servers are on S3. But people could use the same issue with Azure.
I'm trying to understand like how it's working when it's running from GitHub. Like, I don't understand how, I guess, no, because we're retrieving the files from the repo then. That's fine. Okay,
Well, you were relying on the server not restarting in the middle. I mean, not the container not restarting,
no,
which
no,
is a
no,
fair
it
assumption.
No,
doesn't.
you're
no,
right.
no.
You're right, Michelle. It's because we downloaded the entire repo beforehand.
It's
Actually,
because we have the repo.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
The
You
Git
get it
the
from
GitHub
repo.
the GitHub action has a separate copy of the entire GitHub repo, and
Which
That's
is
ridiculous.
possibly another, no, we need the API for that. Maybe we could download the entire package and just
No.
parse the files. in
Why?
there.
I think the whole point of killing the playground is that it's people still in development, stuff that might not be in committed yet, and if we started linking back to
That's
GitHub,
true.
they would have to be
It,
committed.
it wouldn't be GitHub. It would be the package that's in the playground, but you're right that they may not have saved files and they may have, yeah, whatever. Okay, never mind.
I've
Well,
copied
it has-
in the functions Jonathan
Wait, what?
uses to do playground manipulation
Mhm.
somewhere in here. Trying to find it. Probably this create package.py. This is probably the one. So this is what you need, I think. I'll link that.
Directory
Yeah,
for-
link those lines.
Yeah, that does look like what we want.
It doesn't retrieve. Is it still?
Well, it's
doing
not
the
necessary
thing?
to retrieve because we're not.
It gives us a
we're
list of
using the
things.
playground functions to do it. There's you can't do that with Kelm because it's Node and not Python.
The stuff we're writing is in Python. It's
Yeah, it's in the ALKiln
Yeah.
in the playground.
there's Kiln and then there's Kiln in the playground. Kiln in the playground is Python, and it's would be doing exactly this sort of stuff.
Right.
Saved file.
So this is very close to what we want, if not exactly.
Get
It at least
file.
points us in the right direction for like what doxable things to look at.
Yeah, this should be all you really need. Just getting. You're not using this already to get the list of.
I'm getting a
projects and
list of
stuff,
projects, but I don't understand.
but you never got the files.
Yeah, we had never gotten list of files.
You probably copied it from
But-
this same place already, or maybe.
But
not,
we don't
maybe you
need the
got it.
directories of the file.
Yeah, I mean it's really just a couple lines. The rest of this is creating the zip file.
What? Okay, maybe I can go over what that function is doing with someone, because it's definitely not calling a retrieve, right? It's not using the retrieve method. I thought it was just getting the paths, but you're
The
saying
reason you
that the
need
paths will,
retrieve
yeah,
is because you are doing manipulation, not using DocAssemble's API. You're not using DA file methods, right? You're trying to look at the raw place it's stored. This code does not need to do that. Neither would your code. I mean, it would need to add a retrieve step. That's your point. So you get through the list of files. And I think this directory area is going to be one of these parameters is probably going to be like sources versus questions, right? I think that's what the area parameter is.
I think so, yeah.
So you would iterate
don't
through that. Instead
understand.
of getting a list of files names, you would get the list of file names and then also call the .retrieve method on each of those. That's not necessary
Okay.
for any of this code.
so I
because
would need to add
gonna
retrieve
still-
in there.
you
I
need
thought
to
we
add
were
retrieve.
saying, that
This is actually doing,
would put it in the cache by itself.
No,
this
if
is
it
actually
doesn't-
doing less than
This
I
is-
thought it would, but
this
Okay,
is the
so
way
that's
that you
fine.
would need to get the files that are in a given playground, the list of the files. And
This
they're
is-
gonna be
this is
List of
still
files
doing-
or list of
DA files.
directories.
this is still doing less than I think it is though, because it's not, it is, yeah, like you're right, it's still doing os.path is file is only going to be looking at stuff in the local file system. And it's assuming that everything directory 4 just is os.path join, like from what I can looking at what the actual
yeah.
source is in DocAssemble. It's not doing anything fancy. It's not like prefetching everything or looking at what's on S3 in that folder. It's just saying here, what's already stored here.
So what is this saved file? This is the same code that is inside docassemble already. I think it copied it in because
Yeah,
it said I can't depend on it staying the same.
that's fair. So there must be somewhere else that it's like that Docker symbol is downloading things. For playground
I
stuff.
think it's the saved file class.
That's right. Yeah, maybe that's doing more of the work.
Fix equals true. And the directory for as well, potentially.
So we think it is getting everything from S3 or we think it's not?
Well, I think S3 is a red
unclear.
herring. It's like whatever underlying place the file is stored, this is abstracted a level above it. You can't assume it's S3, it could be Azure.
No, I know. I'm just asking
Cloud.
whether
Yeah.
this is retrieving, whether Bryce was correct or whether Bryce was mistaken. Is this only dealing with already cached files or is it getting all the files?
So here I'm getting a list of files. Let's see. I was thinking it didn't matter because I'm using the DA file methods to actually manipulate them. So if I had the list of file names, I don't care if they're retrieved yet or not, because when I actually try to do something with them, they're retrieved. So I call the .path method in the appropriate place to use them here in the zip file area. So that
What retrieves them?
that happens transparently when you use DA file.path. Like when it tells you the path, it's saying this is the local path on the file system. It's made sure that it's downloaded if necessary.
So
But
we can do that.
Bryce's point is well taken that if this is just doing os.dir, it would not actually see those files if they hadn't been downloaded at the time this code
Yeah,
runs.
that was the question. So
So
only
it
sees
must
cached
actually have already
files.
downloaded them in some way if it works.
Yeah, I think you
Or
are.
it hasn't run into that bug.
Well, this is the exact code from the playground code that already exists. I just copied it in.
I see.
So I don't think it has that bug because then the playgrounds just wouldn't work when people were using S3 and they'd
Okay.
restart a container at any point.
Okay.
You were saying, Bryce, is it the same? You look at the saved file source.
Looking through, yeah, there's the save file in it, and then save file in it calls fix, which does some cloud things. I can't quite tell what they are, but it does look like it's at least like listing keys in the cloud. Keys are not actually keys. I think that's just file names, but
Okay.
it's doing something, yeah, with things, and I can't quite tell if it's downloaded them or not directly. But it probably
is,
it
then
is
this
probably
would
something in
cache
save
them.
file specifically.
If it is, then this would cache them by itself. Like,
Correct. So you wouldn't actually have
Yes.
to call the .retrieve method after all. Just getting the list of files seems to already download them.
Well, I can't tell if retrieve might download. There might be a difference between downloading the files and just looking at the file name and the file structure. Otherwise, so we might still need to recall retrieve.
I think it just adds like a link to the file. Maybe just make sure there's a file number.
Yeah, I don't
before.
quite remember.
We'll call retrieve just in case, I guess. It won't do anything extra except like a null op, but I don't think it's going to force it to retrieve it if it's already on the system. If it does, we already established that we were okay with that overhead.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I can double check all this stuff with Jonathan.
where the saved file comes from. Well, it says it right there, doesn't it? Web app.files. Big file.
I can just ask Jonathan, you know, our idea is to just make sure that everything's in the cache. What's the best way to do that? And he might have a better idea, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've probably gotten it, so it might be helpful to say this is what we were trying. Nothing else.
Yeah, yep. We can also, I can also say like, this is the method we're looking at right now. For sure.
Here's the fix. It fixed self.fix. Okay, makes sense. So fixed its turns. No, if fix is the same as retrieve, but not. I think some of this is having to do with the syncing, where get contents to file name. This seems to tell me that it actually has already downloaded it, but when I see something that's called contents.
That's true. But it's not saying where it got it from to begin with. Like if it's just getting it from the cache, then that name still makes sense.
Let's see where it's actually referenced in the cloud.
It says cloud, so
Yeah.
that to me is really like promising, right?
Where's cloud reference? Just we list the names of the keys. Okay.
List
so
keys
it's
is the,
actually-
yeah, list keys is the only thing that's being used by cloud, and cloud specifically is the thing that I was like, there is some way through docassemble to get what is to like set up a S3 or Azure or something that is can like talk with that through docassemble without us having to know the config directly, and that's cloud.
And the key is obviously not a string.
He's a string, I
Whatever.
think.
Well, get contents to file name, key is not a string.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Oh, no, it's S3 key. Sorry, it's a specific type of object or Azure key or something,
Interesting.
which is a
Let's look at
another docassemble thing.
this.
And you can call, yeah, get contents to string exists. Delete, get contents to file name. That's okay. Which I didn't actually see. I missed that. Nice.
I mean, it has one for
Okay, so it
Amazon, one
downloads
for
the file.
Microsoft.
Specifically, it downloads the file. So, okay, we do know it downloads it when it
And
runs.
it's getting it from S3 object.bucket name.
Yep.
Or whatever.
Yeah, there's a version for Microsoft as well. But yeah, in this case, that's the one that I looked at because it seems more relevant.
I'm just saying it
We're
looks like
trying.
it's actually reaching into the cloud.
Okay, so you
Okay,
should just be
so
able to look
like-
at the dashboard code and just copy it in.
Yeah.
And it's really simple. It's 4 lines. You don't have to
Then
run it.
then I also, I mean, I don't need the file path after that really, because I don't need to pass it in at that point, because we just, it's in the temp folder, we think. That's awesome. Oh my gosh, this is saving me so glad I bring stuff up in here.
Yes.
I'm always like, I should
too.
just do this work myself. And then I bring stuff up and it's like, oh, now it's 10 times easier.
All right. Well, let's stop there. It's 12:30. We already had an extra 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And we solved a couple of good problems. So, all right. Anything else before we sign off? That doesn't-
I mean, nothing fast.
All right. We'll see you all Friday.
Friday.
Sounds good.
All right, I think so. I think I will be Friday.
Yeah.
Just not through Thursday. Okay.
See ya.